But I have been working at the Career Center for 4 years now, class of 2020 grad. And I get to work as a wayfinder, a staff wayfinder, and help a lot of you answer questions, dispel a lot of the toxic professional culture at Georgetown, and feel equipped well to go into the working world. So we're excited to work with you today on resumes.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, let's dive in. So we've got a little bit of an outline for today. We're going to do a quick intro just to kind of get a sense of what questions you guys have about resumes, a little bit about the purpose of them. Why do we even use these things, right? And then Abigail's going to share a little bit about how we contextualize these documents within, our current situation and country and context and all that. So we're going to dive a little bit into that, the future of the resume, and then we're going to get into actually the resume crafting skills, the formatting, the content, how to do all that, and then cover letters at the end. So that's the game plan for today. All right, so a little intro. What do y'all think is the purpose of the resume? And what can it do for you? Feel free to just unmute yourself or chat in the chat.
Okay, I'll go.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, the purpose of a resume is just to kind of highlight things that you've done, whether it's relevant experience to whatever you're using your resume for, and just sort of tell a little bit of a story about who you are professionally, mostly.
I like that. Yeah, tell your story, right? And to showcase some of your experience, right? Might be showcasing your skills or a project that you worked on. And you're really trying to say, hey, employer, I'm qualified. Bring me in so I can tell a little bit more of my story, right? So that's the piece. And it might be your story shifts depending on who's in the room and what you're applying for. And so we'll talk a little bit about that later. But yes, ultimately, we're showcasing our experience. And sometimes it's good to just note that it can feel like we're being put into a box with a resume. We only get this one page and we're supposed to tell our whole story. And it's really just a part of your story. And so we're here today to help you celebrate all of your identities and experiences, professional, personal, offer some framing, some contextualizing, some structure, because that's really helpful when we're doing these documents. Ultimately, to empower you to navigate this space and maybe disrupt some career spaces as well along the way. Cool. So Abigail's going to get into some contextualization.
Of course. So when we think about the resume, right, like we got to think about where it came from. What was the historical context for this document? And what people have been saying or have been able to find is that the first resumes came about in the 13th century, if I did that like century math right, 1482, right? People like to cite Da Vinci's cover letter as a resume, okay? And of course, this was Da Vinci asking the Duke of Milan, hey, will you pay me to do the Last Supper? And the Duke of Milan was like, sure, right? But then how did the resume become an institution, right? An institution in the sense that everyone kind of knows what it is, but isn't really clear on what it is. And typically everyone has to interact with it. This happened, at least in the US, in the 30s through the 60s, right? Started out as like a scrap of paper or like a bit of like scribble on a napkin after you have a conversation with a potential employer, right? Of the things that you've done. And then it's turned into this whole thing where you have to have a formatted resume and you send it in and you apply, right? So you're expected to create and submit a paper resume by the 60s. And then we had some changes throughout the ages. In the digital age, right, in the 70s, we got word processors, so no longer handwritten. In the internet age, broadly as people like to call it, in the 90s, we have online applications and online submissions. So you might email your resume. And what people call Web 2.0 or the early 2000s, typically you would upload and or email your resume through an online application portal instead of, say, just having a resume that you would email. You might fill out information, right? And of course, today, what does a modern resume look like? The distinguishment between the early 2000s and the 2010s is that often resumes are part of or central to your LinkedIn or Facebook profiles, right? So how do we distinguish like that between what we're used to as a resume? It's also vague. It is just like an institution, right? So we have to think about how we can contextualize resumes in our society and in our time, right? When you're writing a resume, you often have to think about what country or language or cultural norms there are in the document you're writing, right? In the States with an English speaking employer, it would be seen kind of weird if you submitted a resume in Japanese, right? They'd be like, I don't know what to do with this. And so when you're writing a resume, you often contextualize yourself based on where you are, what culture or community you're part of. And when it comes to larger and even international institutions like the resume, we have to recognize that we're operating within whatever the dominant culture is. In the States, the term that we use to identify that dominant culture holistically is white, right? And this is probably because the Constitution was penned by, our market economy was built by, and history has largely been recorded by typically and traditionally white, hetero, cis, able-bodied, wealthy men, right? And if these are the individuals who built the institutions that determines, they are also the individuals who determine the standard for the institution. So this applies when you're thinking about resumes and about the job search in general. I'll pass it back over to Amanda now to talk about white dominant culture in detail.
Yeah. So, okay. Abigail just shared with us a little bit about the background, right? Like what we're coming into this space understanding. And so when we think about what that means for our documents and white dominant culture is really that we can acknowledge that there's bias that's happening, right? And so a question for you guys is, how might you think bias or discrimination shows up when employers review applications?
Throw your thoughts in the comments, or rather the chat.
Yeah. Thoughts or experiences here?
I know it's a Friday, it's hard, guys, but please be interactive. We're trying to make this interactive.
I'll throw y'all a bone here. So essentially what we understand, and I'll even just like share with you guys two article titles. I'm not the whole article, but just the titles of these articles written by Harvard Business Review. One, which is depicted here, is that minorities who quote unquote whiten their resume get more job interviews. And so when we say white, we're not just saying like it's sort of a group, right? It's like what Abigail said, it's like white, male, cis, wealthy, like that is sort of what we mean by white. And so minorities, and that's anyone who doesn't adhere to that particular group, when we whiten our resume, apparently we get more job interviews. And so whether that's our queerness, whether that's our ethnicity, our race, our gender, our disability, when we downplay that for whatever reason, because of bias, because of discrimination, because of how people view resumes, we might get more opportunities. So what does that mean? I'm not necessarily saying do that, but I just want to make sure all of us are aware of what we're coming into when we craft our documents. And so what that means for us is that while discrimination federally, right, is not allowed, and what folks have said is that practices are fair, but it's the operation, how things are played out, that are discriminatory or that have bias. And so while we ideally can't discriminate, it comes through in some ways. And so for y'all, what that means is don't feel ashamed if you feel like you have to assimilate or present a whitened version of yourself. You're going to feel imposter syndrome in this space if you have a or many of minority identities. What can help? Talk to your peers, talk to friends, talk to people who you trust. come to the Career Center, talk to us. This is what we do. And we love talking about these things to help you navigate. And as you get into the workplace, find ways you can fight against, these toxic pieces of career culture that we're talking about, or even outside, whether it's in the workplace or outside. Mentor folks. And if you have more what's called like a majority identity, you can be a great ally, right? You can help give voice to other people. You can talk to them to understand their experiences and speak up when discrimination or bias is when you're seeing it happen, play out. And so our role is to help you work, navigate within the system, disrupt it a bit, but ultimately help you feel far more comfortable navigating this space, given all of these pieces. So in short, right, you get to share your story on this piece of paper, this resume, this cover letter, in a way that encompasses all of your skills and strengths, regardless of how you think you may be perceived by others. Way easier said than done, but it's definitely possible. And the hope for the future of the resume and where we're moving is that it's less about what you've done and far more about who you are. Okay, now we're getting into the skill building of crafting resumes. Before we get into that, we would love to hear what gives you pause about writing your resume. What's hard about it? And what are specific questions that you hope that we can answer for you today?
I mean, I feel like my biggest problem has always just been like fitting everything on one page and knowing what's important to include for particular positions and what's not, and making it look nice and not super crammed while still, fitting it into that one page limit.
Yeah, that one page. It creates so much tension and anxiety, right? Like, I would imagine that it's like, how do I be descriptive and concise? Those two things don't seem to like go together, right? Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that. That's great. Any others?
One thing for me is like, I've heard a lot of advice says that you should tailor your resume to each position you apply to. And yeah, I kind of have trouble doing that.
Okay, so how to do that better, and maybe in a way that like doesn't mean that you have to spend 3 days on each resume. So like maybe a more efficient way of doing that. Yeah. Okay. Okay, anything else that y'all want to make sure that we get to today?
And if it doesn't come to you now, but later, feel free to drop it in the chat.
Yeah, great point.
So if you're like a minority or like a first gen, how do you like communicate that on your resume, or like should you?
That's a great question. Yeah. And it's right, it's a balancing act, right? Deciding whether or not and or how much to communicate of who you are. And this should always, as you're doing it, right, we'll get to this, this should always feel comfortable and authentic for you, right? If you feel like you can't articulate who you are, right, that's really unfortunate. And that's when you have to do like an opportunity cost, right? Should I be applying to this? Is this really what I want? Are these really the people I want to be around? If you feel like you can't. And hopefully in the positions that you apply for, you feel like you have the autonomy to say who you are in as much detail as you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, I think great point. And it also depends, like, are there other pieces of your story that you want to make sure that you share as well? And so it's sort of like, what do I want to emphasize? What do I want to make sure I share? And then like the question is like, how do I then put it all together? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Great question. Y'all are asking great questions and thinking about awesome things. Why don't we go ahead and dive in? And like Abigail said, as you have questions, throw them in the chat, raise your hands. All questions, all comments welcome. All right, let's get to crafting. So I like to use a metaphor when thinking about these documents, right? Because there are so many things you're like, okay, how does this all fit together? What's the difference between a cover letter and a resume, and like how do they connect? So think about your career story as like a book, like it's like a volume of your life history, right? It's not the whole story, but it's a part. And so if it's a book, you are the author. And that cover illustration, right? So what you're seeing here, like you're seeing some graphic novels, you're seeing some books that most folks know. Let's even take a look at Harry Potter. As problematic as J.K. Rowling is, a lot of folks know Harry Potter. And so that image of the Sorcerer's Stone is very descriptive. It doesn't tell the whole story though, right? Just something to pull you in. And that's the cover letter. The cover letter is that cover illustration. It's that front cover. When you open that book, you have a table of contents that shows you these next chapters. Well, in your own story, that table of contents is your resume. It's your past chapters of career and work that you've done and experience that you've had. And then when you get into the interview, that's what you actually get to tell your whole story. So that's how it's all sort of put together. So cover letter is far more narrative, right? Where it's basically like an essay. You guys write lots of essays at Georgetown. So think of it like an essay. It's a persuasive essay that you're trying to say like, hey, pick me, I'm qualified. Let me tell you the rest of my story. So here are just some sort of excerpts that you might use, whether you're an athlete and how you might talk about that experience, or historian of yearbook, writing for the school paper. You're really trying to align your story with what you're applying for. And that resume is a table of contents. So I was a camp counselor, I was an athlete, and you might have bullet points, right? Or paragraphs under that. All right. Let's talk about resume types, because this can get a little confusing. So resumes, we have something that we're going to talk about. It's called the master resume, which is sort of like an all-encompassing document. You've got your one-page resume, which everyone says like is the most common, right? You got to fit everything on one page, and it's what you're going to send to people. Is usually a one-page resume. You have federal resume, which is different, right? It's particular to certain jobs within the federal government, and that's more than one page. There are resources if you have questions about a federal resume, because we're not going to go over that today, on Handshake and on our website. So take a look at that. CVs. Okay. So sometimes you're like, you might see like submit your resume CV/CV here. And you're like, what is a CV? It means something different depending on the context that you're in. If you're applying to an international opportunity, so let's say someplace in like Europe, CV and resume are the same thing. It might be a different format though. So you do want to understand that the contextual pieces of what might go on an international resume versus a domestic resume. Within the US, if someone says, please submit your CV, it's an academic resume. And so it's actually many pages long. It's more geared toward like research and teaching work. And again, we're not going to go over that today, but we want to let you know that there are sort of different meanings for that term. Our focus for today is on how to build the master and how to ultimately customize resumes using a process from master to one-page resume. Okay, I'm gonna let Abigail get us started on master resumes.
Awesome. So master resumes are your friend, right? A master resume is all of the volumes of the books in the story that is your life, right? It's all of the table of contents that you make for every single volume. So hopefully it includes all of the experiences, opportunities, and skills that you have, right? And it's hopefully, right, like the source from which you construct your one-page resume for any opportunity that you apply for, right? Typically, just to keep your mind straight, right, it's a good idea to have it in reverse chronological order so that as you're looking at your master resume, you can be like, oh yes, I did this 3 years ago and it's further down. Oh yes, I did that 5 years ago. And just 3 broad sections that make it easy to structure everything that you've done on your master resume should be and could be education, experience, and your skills/interests, right? So one of the things that you should know about this is that in the master resume, you're going to have some pieces that are not done out well, like the bullet points are kind of shoddy, like you don't have verbs to start everything. But what you want to do is you want to record everything that you've done so that it's easier for you to construct your one page, right? And you should also know that your master resume is never finished, right? So on to the next section.
A few quick nuggets here. If you guys are crafting a master resume, put it on the cloud. Use Google Docs, use Dropbox, whatever, something on the cloud, because if you lose your computer or something happens to it and it crashes, this is not the document that you want to recraft. So pro tip, use Google Docs, and yeah, it's always iterative.
Okay, so a little more detail on those 3 sections, right? So starting with the education section, hopefully you would include, say for the Georgetown case, right? Your school, your major, maybe your GPA, and any courses that you really enjoyed or liked, right? Or even just courses that you took all together. You can record everything on your transcript there, right? Hopefully if you have like study abroad or any academic honors, you would put them there too, right? So if in high school you were National Honor Society, right? Like put that as maybe like a bullet under that educational experience. If you got the advanced diploma, you completed community service under that education's like section, put that there as well. And so as you can probably tell, like I mentioned, if you did community service and that's part of like your school, you could put that under your school, but you don't have to put it there either, because as you can see in the experience section, right, your clubs and volunteering, right, community service, athletics, any jobs, even like part-time, like waiter jobs or anything like that, right, should go under experience. Jobs and internships, the research that you've done, the projects that you've worked on, or even if you have course-based internships, right? So your experience section will likely be like 15 pages long by the time you're done, like, or feel like you're done writing it, but it doesn't have to be complete, right? And of course, as you can see, there's a star next to experience section. What is experience? It's many things. It's everything, because experience is experience, regardless of where you got it from or when you did it.
And I'll say this, if you guys remember that you're the author of these documents, right? Let's say you're teaching, you're a TA, but you want to go for like an acting position. That teaching experience, that TA experience is relevant, right? Lesson planning is kind of like scripting, like actually teaching a section is performing. And so experience is relevant. We just have to translate it depending on what we're applying for. And even if you didn't get paid to do it, let's say you were just taking care of a sibling, you were being, a caretaker, that's experience. So think about experience very broadly.
Yeah. So to talk about the next few sections, right? Hopefully you might have a section that lists out some of your like skills as they might be asked for in an opportunity, and or languages, right? So this could be like Excel or Adobe or patient software or even social media, right? And it could also be like foreign languages that you speak, right? Any languages that you speak. And it can also be, where's my mind trying to go with this? Those are the 2 sorts of categories that my mind says it can be, but you typically don't want it to be a list of what would be looked at as buzzwords, right? So saying things like interpersonal communication skills, because those skills are conveyed in the experience section, right? Sort of having this, oh, you worked on a project with a team of 4 people and you had to schedule meetings and you did this, like that is where those sorts of skills are communicated. So you want your like skills and languages section to be things that are come across as more hard skills, if that makes any sense. And of course, in any opportunity you're applying for, you're going to fine tune what that skills and languages section looks like on your resume. Another note, right, is like you can have an honors and awards section, right? This is up to you, it's your master resume, but it might be more helpful to put it where you earned it, right? So if you got this is my example here, like I studied abroad in France and I got a DELF B1 certification saying that Abigail can speak French well enough to get a job. I would probably put that under my study abroad experience in my education section, because that's where I have it. but I could also just have a whole section of certifications with the year, right? And what they were and for how long they last. Same thing with honors and awards.
All right, so as you can see that there are like nuances with the master, but ultimately it captures everything. All right, let's talk a little bit about the one page. So you have your master, it's got everything in there. You've got your education, your experience section, your skills someplace down on like page 3, maybe. So it has a similar format. And what you're going to do is you're going to take that master and you're going to create a new document from that master. And that's ultimately going to end up being your one page. And so it's going to include the same headers. You're going to have an education section. You're going to have an experience section, maybe a skills and interests or hobbies section. But you might specialize your headers. So let's say I'm applying for a research position. So instead of saying education, experience, skills, I might say education, research experience, additional experience, or leadership experience. I might craft my headers particular to that position. And that's really how we start to align our story. And people read resumes the way they read like a BuzzFeed article. You know, they look for the bold and what's in all caps first. And your headers are a great way and the first way that an employer is gonna look at your resume. So might as well tell them what you're going for: programming experience, leadership. So that way they can say, great, this is aligned. So ways to tailor, right? So somebody asked, like, how do I actually tailor this one page to the job? How to do this? Your job posting. If the job posting has quite a bit of information, some job postings don't tell you much, but if they actually have some good content, that is your key. So you've got your master, let's say you've got the job posting over here, you're pulling in content from your master and you're pulling in language from that job description in order to align and match your experience with that position.
And in terms of language, we're thinking things like the kinds of verbs that they're looking for, right? So if a job post says like analytical skills, right? Or multitasking, right? Or collaboration, those might be the bullets that you use to describe a skill under an experience that you have, rather than whatever you used in your master, which is like a synonym for that given verb. But it tells the employer, right, that you read their job posting, that you're actually interested in doing the specific kind of work that they're hoping for you to do.
Let's say there's not much in that job description. Here's a pro tip. Go to Google. So I'm going to go to Google here and I'm going to type in policy internships DC, just in Google. And I'm going to go to this blue header here. And not that I'm going to apply to any of these, but perhaps, and you can sort of see because it's kind of like cut off here. Hang on. Whoop. Okay. So I'm going to read more. Here's what we're talking about. Collaboration, anticipates obstacles, business models, coordinating external advocacy events. Job descriptions, whether it's like looking at just similar roles or roles within a particular industry, that's where you get language to really tailor that one page. Okay, let's get back. All right, any questions around just process before we get into formatting and then content? So questions about the master, questions about looking at language. Okay. All right. So with format, and this is one of the first things that an employer reviewing your resume is going to look at. It's really just what's the aesthetic of it? How does it look? And so what's important to keep in mind is consistency. So what we mean by consistency is make sure that everything is formatted in the same way. So if we think about the way people read resumes, in the States, we read top down, left to right. So that means that the left-hand side is where our eye tracks the most, and the top is the most important part of this. So your name goes at the top, right? And then everything kind of starts on that left-hand side. You want to keep consistency in how you format your months, your dates. So it should be the month and the year, spelled out month. It shouldn't be numeric. So January 2021. You can abbreviate, Jan 2021. Margins. Okay, so a lot of folks are like, how do I work with space, right? How do I fit everything on one page? So a pro tip here is that you actually have wiggle room with your margins. Now, Georgetown students tend to get a little close with this one, but you have a range that you can work with, 1/2 inch to a full inch. Word usually just automatically opens you up with 1 inch all the way around. So pro tip, change your margins to 1/2 inch all the way around, and that gives you the maximum amount of space you can work with. And that usually gives you like 5 more lines. Okay, font. You got some wiggle room here as well. You want to use anywhere between 10-point to 12-point font, and easily readable fonts, nothing like script or anything too wiggly. Just normal, Garamond, Arial, Times, those are your type of fonts. You don't want to go lower than 10-point font, largely because the person on the other end really needs to actually read your resume. And if it gets below that, it can be too small to read and it can overwhelm the eyes. So 10 to 12-point font. Your name, though, can be larger than 12-point font. And then in terms of formatting your content, up to you on whether you want to use paragraphs or bullet points. Bullet points do a nice job of aligning everything to the left, and then you just want to make sure those are consistent. Another thing with consistency is if you're using bullet points and if you want periods at the end of your bullet points, make sure all of your bullet points have periods at the end, or take away the periods at the end and just make sure none of them have it. So again, consistency is important. In terms of verbs, you want to make sure that your bullet points start with a verb, and a strong verb, not like responsible for, right? How about like collaborated, spearheaded, designed? And your tense should match, meaning if it's a present experience, it should be present tense. If it's a past experience, it should be past tense. A couple other notes in terms of formatting and consistency. Leave room for the eyes, right? A lot of us can be worried about including all of our experience, but if we put too much on a resume, it can overwhelm and then it actually detracts from reading it. A way that we can help with differentiating text is actually using bold and italics. So maybe your headers are all caps and bolded and there's an underline, right? So very clear, and then it's consistent between all headers. Maybe your organizations are all in bold and all of the roles that you have are in italics. And then again, you just make sure those are consistent. Stick with the same font type throughout. And then just as this is another pro tip, you can put your contact information in the header. Okay, let's talk a little bit about content. So a couple things here is really focus once you have a solid resume, you really want to make sure your content is descriptive and talks about impact. And we've got a formula that can help with that. Abigail, you want to take this one?
Yeah, let's do it. So in, say, a bullet point under an experience, you want to make sure that you're meeting the goal of painting a picture for the employer, right? So it should answer like what, the 5 W's and how, right? So who, what, where, when, why, and how. And you want to aim for clarity and precision so that you can get as much detail into that tiny space, right, on your 1-page document and still paint a really good picture, right? And we can, of course, help you with doing that if you need help. Feel free to come to drop-ins if you're like, this is 3 lines long, please help me shorten this, but I want to be just as precise, right? So hopefully if you decide to use the bullet point format, right, or even if you use the paragraph format, you want to start with a strong action verb. I linked our cheat sheet to a bunch of action verbs in the chat so you guys can find that, right? You want to state how or what you did to demonstrate a specific skill, right? And in that bullet point or paragraph, you want to include the purpose of you doing that, the result, or whether or not you accomplished it or had an impact, right? If you can, quantify. It helps people get a good sense of the scale, right, of the things that you did, right? And therefore like the size of your impact or result. So an easy formula could be, say that you used the verb accomplished. You accomplished X by/in doing Y, which you measured with Z, right? If that makes sense. You can use that, you can switch around like how X, Y, and Z appear. And if that structure isn't particularly useful for your given skill that you want to show, that's completely fine. But this is a good way to make sure that you answer all of the W's, right? And that you do it in a sort of concise way. So we are going to practice with a couple of sample bullet points that we have here for you. And we would love it if you all would chime in and point out where things could be improved. So imagine that you are the hiring manager and you're looking at these 3 experiences on a resume. Take a minute to read them, of course. And then if anyone has any thoughts or could say, here's where they could make this better, or here's where like they've done a good job, feel free to chime in.
They could add a date to the tombs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep, talking about consistency, right? They've got dates on other ones, but not that one. Yeah, what else do y'all see?
I feel like you could like put your position kind of before the agency you're working for, just so they get like an idea of like what kind of positions you've worked in the past.
Yeah.
So that's a stylistic choice. That's a great, yeah. So you could actually you could switch it up so you can see what role first before organization. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on to the next one, right? So you've got.
Just before we move on, I want to make a note of what do you guys notice about the bullet points? Do you like them? What's missing from them?
I was looking at the bullet point that says developed analytical writing and communication skills. I feel like that would be better suited with like showing how you did that with actual activities that you did, not just saying that you did it.
Nail on the head. Yeah. Like, cool. How did you develop these things and in what ways, right? Absolutely. We definitely want to show, not just say, hey, I've got communication skills. All right. What do you guys think about this one?
Good, bad, indifferent, any potential improvements they could make.
The first section has periods.
Good eye. Yep. You're seeing that they chose periods in one section, but not the other. Good looking out. Is there anything that they do well? Oh yeah, go ahead, Sydney.
Yeah, I was gonna say one thing that they do better is quantifying what they did. There you see a lot of numbers right off the bat.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see actually how quantifying can show and sort of describe a very big picture in just a few characters, right? So contacting donors, right? I'm like, okay, 5. Contacting 200 donors. Whoa, okay, got a better picture now. Yeah, so a lot more on impact, a lot more quantifying. Take a look at their verbs, how they start off as well. So the one prior was like responsible for, work towards the organization's mission, which we don't really understand. This, contacted, attended, contributed, right? Now we're getting more active. All right. So you guys got a sense of, okay, what's a resume that needed some work? What's a better resume? Still needed some work on a couple of things, right? But overall better. Let's talk about how you actually customize the one page a little bit better. So when you got an opportunity that you're like, yes, I want to apply to this one. Again, look at that description, but you might also talk with people that work there, peers, and just get a sense like, how might you tailor this? What do you think I should emphasize about my experience? So you want to research the position and you want to talk to people that can help. What verbs appear most frequently in that job description? Because then you can incorporate that into your one pager. So what's most relevant in terms of your bullet points? So in what you have crafted, you might actually reorder your bullet points depending on what's most relevant. or recent or unique. You might also change just like the action verbs that you're using. A couple other things, changing up your section headers, right? So if your resume, just sort of like general that you have is like experience and extracurriculars, maybe you change it up. Maybe it's leadership experience, advocacy experience. You might change up your relevant coursework line to be more aligned. And then you just really want to personalize based off of your skills and interests. And I'll say this, the last step that you do when customizing your document is make it one page. Because if that's the first step, then you've likely taken out a lot of content that you could use. So first is get the picture that you want, the story that you want to tell, put it all in there. The last thing that you do is take out the least relevant pieces to make it one page.
And of course, if you need help doing that cutting down, we're here to help you. And of course, to like reassure you in the fact that that was uncomfortable and you just hid a part of yourself that maybe you really liked, but to help you figure out how to best cut down, and starting, of course, with formatting things like, can we make the margins bigger? Can we make the font smaller? And then after that, potentially cutting things out.
Yep. Okay, let's talk a little bit about resume or cover letters. We just talked about resumes, cover letters. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to put our handout, our job search document handout in the chat, so you guys can actually see some good examples of a cover letter as well as resumes. So there you go. Okay. So that document is great. And I want to say it's like page 7 or 8 is where we get into cover letters. And so what you need to know about a cover letter is that there is a particular format and structure that's good to build off of. It's formatted more like a memo than just like a general letter. And what that means is you have your name at the top. It should be branded the same as your resume in terms of that top section with your info. And then you might actually have a line that says what job that you're specifically applying to at the top. Then there's the address and the employer that you're specifically sending it to, the name of the individual or the title of their position, and then you go into your letter. So there's an example in that handout, and actually what I can do is I can pull that up for us. Hang on one second. Maybe. Okay, it's not coming up. Okay, here we go. So here's the document. Let's scroll down to cover letters. All right. So page 8, here's the formatting here. You've got your heading, your date, the employer's name, their address, and then here's actually the structure of what it would look like. And so that first paragraph, you're introducing yourself. You're saying, you know, who you are and what you're applying for, why you're applying, why you're interested, and what experience you have. So I'll actually show you an example. But ultimately, that last sentence of your intro paragraph sets the reader up for the rest of the cover letter, which is saying, I have these experiences which make me a qualified candidate. So let's actually just take a look at what that would look like. So in this example, thrilled to learn about your newsroom internship program on the Washington Post website. Boom, I know exactly what you're applying for. I know how you came to that information. Now, take a look at this second sentence. It tells a lot. As an aspiring reporter with a focus on social justice, I appreciate not only the high quality of your reporting, but also your organization's focus on giving back to the DC community at large. I now know your career aspirations. You want to be a reporter. I now know a value that you have that you are aligning with this organization. And I now know that you've done a little bit of research into who we are. And then that last sentence really says what skills that they are trying to highlight to that employer that make them aligned and qualified. So I'm confident that my research experience, strong writing ability, and creativity will allow me to thrive in this internship program at the Post this summer. Boom. So now I know that the next paragraph is going to talk about research first. Then it's going to talk about strong writing ability. As a legal intern, use a variety of databases to conduct and organize legal research. Boom. Then the next part down here is talking about writing for the Hoya. And then this third sentence or third paragraph is talking about their creativity experience. And then they close out with that final paragraph, restating their interest, letting them know when they're available, and just thanking them for their time, right? So that is a great example. And that goes along with this format right here. So cover letters are interesting because they're very unique to each individual. So if you guys have questions about your particular cover letter or resume, Abigail and I strongly recommend y'all come in to our drop-ins. We are so happy to take a look at your documents and give you guys some feedback and thoughts. Questions about cover letter, resume?
I have a question just in terms of, and I don't know, I feel like the answer kind of varies, but I never know, like, you know, I have on my resume, I'm a STEM major, and so I apply to, like, you know, STEM related things.
Cool.
And so I have on my resume, I'm a sophomore. So I have included, like, you know, my subject SAT scores that I took in high school. And, like, I don't know, I guess I have a hard time figuring out, like, I'm in college, but I'm not super far into college. Also, the pandemic, like, halted some progress you would have made. So, like, how much of high school experiences matter, or how much should they be included? Things like that.
Great question. I'm so glad you asked this. So yeah, a couple things. Pre-pandemic, I would have said generally, high school tends to come off your resume that you send in after your sophomore summer, right? So after sophomore year is when, you know, high school tends to come off because you have more recent experience. Now, that might be a little bit skewed because of the pandemic. You might continue to have high school on a little bit into your junior year, and that's absolutely okay. And employers know that pandemic has had an impact on all of you. So generally, once you get into junior year, high school starts to come off, but you might still have it a little bit. That's a great question.
And I mean, I will also say, right, if you're applying for something where specifically the best experience you had for that happened in high school, include it. Right. There are some roles in my own experience where I only did a supply chain internship when I was in high school, and I applied for supply chain stuff after graduating. You know, I included that high school internship on there. And in regards to, like, the test scores, right? Like, this sort of depends on what the expectation is for the opportunity you're applying to. A lot of the big banks and consulting spaces like to see your SATs and your ACT, right? Your standardized test scores, but you don't have to have them. So.
Great question. Just a few final notes before y'all sign off. Once you've finished crafting your cover letter and resume, there are a few things that you need to do. One, PDF those documents, because we don't know what type of word processing application an employer has on the other end. So if you submit a Word document, all that beautiful formatting that you did is going to get all wonky. So PDF it, holds it in that format place, makes it nice, and that's when you can maybe even do a print test and say, does anything get cut off? So you make sure that everything's nice and solid. Then you might use, like, if you go into, and again, right now we've got the pandemic, but if you go into an interview at any point in time in your career, you want to make sure you have printed resumes. And there's actually something called resume paper that's a little bit just harder than printed paper. A few other tips: setting up a filing tracking system as you're applying to many things can help you just organize yourself. So there might be a specific way that you title your resumes, or Airtable is a great resource, and they have a whole template for keeping track of applications. It's like smart spreadsheets, is how I would describe it. And then you might want to consider who to ask for your references. All of this information is in that handout we just sent to you, and so it's really good. I highly recommend taking a look at that handout, doing a once or twice over, and at the end, page 10, there's some example verbs for you.
And if you'd rather go to like our website, if say you lose where you put the handout, I just dropped the link to where you can find the same information on our website. But as our slide says, what questions do you have for us?